Get us started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Center for Children's Advocacy webinar series, which is sponsored by the Connecticut Office of the Public Defender. Before we get started, we just wanted to share some general parameters and housekeeping matters. We appreciate everyone keeping themselves on mute so that we can focus on our presenters today. However, we do encourage folks to stay on camera if you can. This would be particularly helpful so that our youth participating today can actually see you. We will be taking questions. However, we ask that you put those questions in the chat, and we're going to try to leave time at the end to address questions. Thank you so much for your patience and cooperation with that. Please know that at the conclusion of the webinar today, we are going to send a follow-up email to all registered participants with follow-up materials and links referenced, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Marisa Halm, and I'm an attorney and the director of our Youth Justice Project at the Center for Children's Advocacy. I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. As a matter of context, in my day-to-day work, I represent primarily justice-involved youth and young adults, assisting with their education and also reentry and reintegration from incarceration. At the Center for Children's Advocacy, or CCA, as we're called, we are the largest nonprofit in New England that represents children and young adults exclusively. We provide advocacy for the youth who are most at risk. We have offices in Hartford and Bridgeport, and we're located in various community sites throughout Connecticut, including hospitals and schools. Our work brings us into courts and also both the child welfare and juvenile justice facilities. We wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without our generous supporters and sponsors, including the Office of the Public Defender that's made today possible. Today, we're convening to discuss a very important juvenile justice issue in Connecticut, the treatment and status of youth who are prosecuted in adult court and who are in the care and custody of the Department of Correction at the Manson Youth Institute, which we also refer to as MYI. The treatment of the youth, as well as the advocacy and care that we provide for them, is the topic of today's conversation. And this is something that's been debated extensively at the state level through the Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee. It's been reported on by our Office of the Child Advocate, and most recently investigated and reported upon by the United States Department of Justice. Our office, along with other national partners, have also been working with the Department of Correction on the conditions of youth at Manson during the ongoing pandemic. Today, we're going to discuss the status of youth currently and talk about this in the context of the DOJ report and its findings. And we're going to also try to touch upon areas of individual advocacy and also areas for possible program and systemic change. We are also extremely grateful to have the opportunity to hear from our youth today. They're here with us, and we look forward to hearing from them and what they are looking forward to seeing. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our presenters today. So first and foremost, we have Sarah Egan. Sarah, are you there? And Sarah is the child advocate for the state of Connecticut. Sarah, can you say just a couple words about yourself and your connection to this work? Sarah might have hopped off. I know she was having technical difficulties. Jessica Fireman, who's one of our presenters today, is the Senior Managing Director of the Juvenile Law Center, and she was co-counsel with our office on a settlement with Department of Corrections. Jessica, would you mind saying a few words about yourself today?
Sure, and hi everyone, it's great to see you here. I'm grateful for the invitation to join this conversation on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So I am at Juvenile Law Center, as Marisa mentioned. We are based in Philadelphia, but work nationally on issues impacting young people in the justice and child welfare system. Our goal is to fight for rights, dignity, and equity and opportunity for all young people. Just happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce Wynette Saunders, who's first Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Administration of Children's Services and served as one of the experts in consultations with the Department of Correction on out-of-cell programming and increasing out-of-cell time. Wynette?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wynette Saunders. First and foremost, I want to thank the Center for Children's Advocacy and the Office of Public Defender Services for doing this important work and allowing me to be a part of it. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to share that my former experience at the New York City Department of Corrections in New York on Rikers Island was prior to Raise the Age. We advocated for Raise the Age, and prior to that, between the years of 2014 through 2018, I served as the Deputy Commissioner for Youthful Offender Programming. You know, this work is very difficult. And so with that being said, there needs to be a really great understanding of youth needs and programming opportunities that allow kids to thrive in an environment that is not the most conducive. And so I think this conversation is going to be pretty exciting, and looking forward to sharing and talking about ways in which we can improve the system for kids across the city.
Thank you very much, Wynette. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our three young people who are going to be participating today from inside of Manson. To maintain their confidentiality and for their own protection, they're going to be off camera and using pseudonyms. Each of them comes from a different city that's a feeder to our juvenile justice system. They've all had experience in the juvenile and adult systems, albeit in very different ways. And all of them have the experience of being at Manson as a minor. We want to extend a gracious thank you to the Department of Corrections and the facility at Manson for working with us to have them participate today. Also, I have to put out a thank you to Heather Pansiera of the Office of the Child Advocate, who is there with them and has been crucial in making this possible. First, I'm going to introduce to you Deshaun, who is 17 years old. He identifies as Black. He's from one of Connecticut's largest cities where he's lived all of his life, and he's grown up as the only child to his mom. Despite being an only, he comes from a very large family, especially on his dad's side, and he's always been surrounded by friends and family growing up. He grew up playing sports, including football, which is his true love, and going to the Baptist church. One of the things that he always looked forward to as a kid was summer camp up in the mountains in New York, where he would go with cousins. He had always done well in school, but admits since high school, especially since the pandemic hit, school has gotten really hard. Remote learning without the opportunity for one-to-one assistance has been really difficult for him, and it led him to become disengaged. When football was suspended due to COVID, he was unable to complete his video for his football scout, and that was very difficult for him to kind of have to part with that dream and that particular goal. He continues to work on his high school diploma and is exploring getting some more help in school. I'd have to describe him as outspoken, very empathetic and outgoing. He's currently at Manson, where he's unsentenced and where he's been for over 9 months. He's there involving charges of assault and robbery, and the case in which those charges are involved the death of his best friend, a loss that he continues to grieve and deal with every single day. Deshaun, would you mind saying hello to everybody?
Hi.
Hello, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Next, I'm happy to introduce to you John. He is 18 years old and he identifies as Black and Hispanic. Although he grew up with just his mom and his older sister, with whom he's very, very close, he has 15 other siblings. He also grew up in a big city where the streets were not very safe. Some of his best memories as a kid are the after-school program where he and his sister used to go and just shoot hoops, play pool, and hang out in the game room. Today, his real passion is music, rap, and R&B. And when he's not at MYI, he plays the sax and the drums. And he's also a really good, I hear, self-taught cook. As a special education student, he's still working on his high school diploma. He's very close to finishing it. And although school's always been a place of up and down for him, it's been more on the downside since he hit high school. He's been involved in the juvenile court since a very young age. And, it's been difficult for him to break out. Coming to Manson was a really tough adjustment for him, and he's tried to make the best of his time there. In his own words, he's learned to survive on the inside just as he did on the outside. I would have to describe him as creative with strong leadership qualities and somebody who really likes to make people laugh. He's currently at MYI where he's been for 2 years. He's finishing out his sentence as a YO, and he'll be going home soon. He recognizes the challenges of returning to his community, but with the proper supports, he will be successful. I know that. John, can you say hello to everybody?
How you doing, everybody?
Great to hear from you. So glad you're here. Thank you. And last but not least, I'm going to introduce you to Joseph. Joseph is a 19-year-old young man who also identifies as Black from one of Connecticut's other big cities. He's the oldest in his family, has 4 siblings, 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. He loves basketball, writing songs, and also quiet time to think. He's also a special education student and has had many challenges since getting to high school. One of the first of them being just to getting to school in general. Living in a big city where transportation's not provided, getting back and forth to school was very difficult and often dangerous. He also began to have some mental health and medical issues in high school, which led him to get more services in school. Prior to being at MYI, he had just one case in juvenile court that involved him having to defend himself. As a result of that incident, he also took a blow to the head, which he just hasn't been the same since that point in time. Since coming to MYI, he's been trying really hard to get to the bottom of his medical and mental health issues, and he continues to work on his diploma. I would describe him as insightful, soft-spoken, and very sensitive. He's currently at MYI for larceny-related charges that happened after he was 18. He's been there pre-trial for 15 months. Since being there, he's lost one of his very good friends to gun violence at home. And he's, as mentioned, just trying to continue to finish his high school diploma. Joseph, would you mind saying hello to everybody?
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Joseph. Thank you for being there. I want to again thank each of you for your willingness to be with us today, and you're very courageous and brave for sharing your voices. Sarah, Egan, are you on now?
I am so sorry about the technical difficulty.
That's okay. And last but not least, I wanted to just introduce Sarah Egan from our state's child advocate, who's one of our other presenters today. Sarah, did you want to talk about your connection to the work?
Sure. So the Office of the Child Advocate is an independent oversight agency, and we are charged by statute with investigating and reporting out to the public and to the legislature regarding conditions of confinement for all incarcerated youth age 15 to 20 throughout the state. So our office has published multiple reports over the last 5 years. And that's work we continue to do on a daily basis, and a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thanks, Sarah. Before we start the panel discussion, we wanted to just provide some basic background on the young people at Manson for the audience. Would you mind moving the slides forward? So currently, Connecticut houses all of children and youth charged with adult crimes at the DOC facility Manson, which is in Cheshire, Connecticut. So this means that their cases are being handled by and prosecuted in the adult court system. The difference between our juvenile court system and the adult court system is drastic, right? The juvenile court system is focused on rehabilitation and treatment, and the adult court system isn't. It's more focused on punitive measures and containment. The transfer to adult court can only occur over the age of 14. So all of the young people, the minors that are at Manson, are between the ages of 15 and 17. Many of these young people are eligible for what's called youthful offender status, YO status, which is an adult court resolution of felony related charges that a prosecutor has to agree to. Also at Manson, we have a large group of 18 to 21-year-olds, who we'll talk about a little bit, that were not covered by the DOJ report, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. So currently, the minors at Manson, this is some background information on the minors at Manson. At any given time, there could be 30 to 50 there. Currently, there's 34 young minors there. 60 to 70% of them have special education needs. 80% of them identify either as Black or Latinx, with the majority of them being Black. 60% of them have at least one confirmed mental health diagnosis. Over 50% of them have had some sort of touch with DCF in the child welfare system. And 90% of the young people that are there right now are unsentenced and pretrial, which is really indicative of the kind of services or lack thereof that they will receive. Next slide, please. So just some national context here. Nationally, Black children are treated disproportionately harsher than white children. So nationally, we're looking at all out of all children nationally, we have 15% of the population that's Black. Yet when you're looking at children being presented to adult court, they make up 63% of that population. In Connecticut, we follow this trend. We're a little bit harsher. 13% of the overall school population is Black. The incarcerated population at Manson, the mandatory school age population there, 68%. Next slide, please. Just some context for Connecticut. So Connecticut opted out of what's called the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, which requires all pretrial youth to be removed from adult court. So we do not currently comply with that. However, pursuant to Public Act 21-174, Connecticut has created a plan to move these pretrial youth out of DOC custody and from MYI. The plan is for them to be taken over by judicial, and for that to happen in 2026. I know that's still being discussed at the Juvenile Justice Policy Oversight Committee level, but that is a plan from Connecticut. Next slide, please. And just to provide a snapshot of the older youth that are at Manson, at the present time, there's 277 older youth there. 80 to 90% of them are Black and or Latinx. Again, a majority of them are Black. 30% of this group is pretrial, and about a third of them have special education needs. Thank you very much. And so To provide some context about the Department of Justice report, recently, back on December 21st of 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division issued a report that was actually initiated after the Office of Child Advocate report that came out in 2019 concerning the conditions of incarcerated youth here in the state. The Department of Justice report, which I think my colleague is going to share out in the chat, was specific to the children at Manson, so the 15 to 17-year-old population, and it covered the period from October of 2019 through December of 2021. The three main findings from the report are that the facility practices of isolation and confinement are extremely harmful to youth, that the mental health system there is inadequate and potentially harmful, and also that the education system there is insufficient for young people with disabilities. As a result of this report, the Department of Correction and the Department of Justice are working together to resolve the issues and the findings in the report. Actually, both parties were invited to participate today, but could not because of the fact that they are involved in ongoing discussions. The Department of Correction wanted to let everybody know that they continue to work with DOC and the Office of the Child Advocate, DOJ and the Office of the Child Advocate on improving conditions for the youth at Manson. And so now we're going to, at this point, jump into our panel discussion and get back to our presenters. I'd like to start with you, Jessica. So given the Department of Justice's report and the concerns that they highlighted, what would you like to highlight for the audience today?
Sure, thank you. I guess before going into some broader thoughts about it, I just want to echo what those findings were. So isolation or room confinement means young people are spending almost all of their day in a locked cell. And that's something we'll talk about more in a bit, but we know is very harmful to young people. Obviously, young people being deprived of mental health care or unable to get the education that they need is also extremely troubling. So the first thing that struck me is just that these are very serious problems that we need to address immediately. Another theme that came across in what DOJ wrote was the underlying context that we're talking about teenagers. And so why does that matter? So the law has actually been quite responsive to the fact that teenagers are not just small adults. A lot of my work is both on law and policy about how young people aren't little adults and what that means for us. So for example, a young person who is placed in room confinement, isolation, solitary confinement, whatever term you use for it, is particularly at risk, even compared to an adult. That's a condition that's going to be hard for anyone. But where young people are in their development, adolescence is one of the periods of the greatest brain growth after those little tiny kid years. So they are learning a lot. And when we give them opportunities to connect, to build relationships, to go to school, to engage in positive activities, we're allowing their brains to develop into healthy, successful adults. So it's a moment in young people's lives that we particularly want to protect and support. And so the DOJ report highlights that there are unique reasons why we have to be particularly protective. And we've seen that in the law that there are a lot of cases about solitary confinement, for example, for adults and for young people. But when it's in the context of young people, the courts are much more protective for obvious reasons. The other thing I just wanted to echo really, which was more from your presentation, Marisa, than from the DOJ report, was this underlying problem of racial disparities in the system. We see this unfortunately across the country. Our justice systems are not treating us fairly across the boards, regardless of race. And so that means that our policies are failing. If our policies were working, we would not see this kind of disproportionate representation of Black and Latinx young people. We would see equal representation. We know that teenagers behave very similarly across races, but that's not how they're treated under the law. And so even as we're thinking about what the conditions are in the facility, I think we need to keep our eye on the fact that those conditions are affecting some young people more than others, and that is partly informed by their race. And so that means our solutions need to take that into account also. And so there are some solutions that can focus on what's happening in a facility, but we also need to think bigger picture about solutions that keep young people out of the justice system and support them in their homes and communities. I guess I'll pause there, Marisa.
Very much, Jessica, for that perspective. Sarah, did you want to talk about a little bit about what you think it's important to highlight from the DOJ report?
Yes, absolutely. First, I also want to echo the finding about racial disproportionality, because I think that is a foundational problem in our system of incarceration, and a system that disproportionately, hugely disproportionately incarcerates Black children is a fundamentally unjust system. And I think we always have to start with that, because the racial justice aspect of this is not parenthetical, it's foundational, and it impacts every aspect of what we need to do to correct the problem. With regard to the DOJ report, I think the number one takeaway for me is that the importance of the Department of Justice report is not just that we need to do better for incarcerated children because we should, because it benefits them, because it benefits the public, because it improves public safety, or because of brain science and all of the other things that are valid and that we're talking about. But that we have to address conditions of confinement, because the Department of Justice found that the conditions of confinement in the facility violate federal law. Specifically, that conditions violate protections against cruel and unusual punishment embedded in the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, and the right to due process of law embedded in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution for pretrial and post-conviction youth. So I think we have to start with that. I mean, that is the most momentous finding about conditions of incarceration in Connecticut in a long time. And it has significant implications for how we move forward. In the introduction to the DOJ report, and I'll just quote from it, the DOJ found that Manson's isolation practices and inadequate mental health services seriously harm children and place them at substantial risk of serious harm. In addition, Manson fails to provide adequate special education services to children with disabilities. Most children have significant histories of learning disabilities and mental illness, yet as the DOJ found, they are deprived of the very services they need to navigate the correctional environment and develop skills and competencies to become productive, successful adults, and to which they are entitled under the law. So the DOJ report then goes on to unpack that, I think, in ways we'll discuss today. But that is their main finding. And that is something that the state of Connecticut and all of us are going to have to work very hard to change and to hold ourselves accountable for fixing. Thank you.
Sarah. Wynette, would you mind, from a facility perspective, talk about what you think one of the biggest takeaways is, or learning lessons is, from the report?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So first and foremost, I think the out of cell time is crucial for the growth of young people while they're within these circumstances. It is very important that there is a comprehensive, robust programming available for young people that focuses on wellness, that focuses on workforce development, that focuses on hope, that focuses on workforce development and reentry. Reentry at admission. Kids need to know that this is not the end of the road, and we should be supporting them with opportunities to rehabilitate, opportunities to maintain hope, opportunities to learn new things, and opportunities to be introduced to pathways for success. So, for example, we all know that education is available, but we also know that traditional educational pathways may not be for everyone. And so we should be introducing workforce development in a way that introduces children to trades, vocational skills. Some examples that I can give that really speak to this is in 2014 through 2018 on Rikers Island, we integrated the youth and the parent voice in what the programming options should be. And so there was a lot of culinary arts, carpentry, electrical, computer literacy. All of our young people these days are experts at technology, and we should hone in on some of those skills and really help them create opportunities to see themselves in ways in which they feel they can be successful. One small example is allowing young people to earn certifications while in custody. One example is flagging. Many of you may be familiar with seeing individuals during or on construction sites or when construction is currently happening, and you can see them with the orange flags. That person has taken a 4-hour course that's called flagging, and they can receive up to $30 an hour for working on a construction site, and it's 4 hours of classroom work that is definitely something that young people can do while incarcerated, giving young people the opportunity to earn certifications and skills so that when they leave detention, they are able to pick an alternative pathway that can support their success and successful outcomes for them and their families. So I think the biggest highlight for me is to ensure that there is sufficient out-of-cell time and sufficient programming opportunities for young people to be successful while incarcerated and upon discharge.
Thank you, Wynette. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask some of the youth, in particular, Deshaun, if he has some thoughts about the environment at Manson and what needs to change. Deshaun, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just listening to the whole question. Yeah, it's a lot that needs to change here. Like, for one, the environments, sometimes they don't wash our clothes for us. We only get to, like, people, I know the people that's 18, they only get to change their sheets one time every, what, is 3 months?
6,
I
7,
my sheets
a
once
year,
5 months.
no soap.
Hold on a sec. Go ahead.
You lose certain programs if you don't show up. You lose mental health services if you refuse one day. You lose things if you do something wrong, and they don't give you that chance to learn from your mistake. They just take it away from you right away. And it's like, what are you getting out of that?
Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is rather than give you an opportunity to learn from your mistake, you're constantly having things taken away.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Deshaun.
You're welcome.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the issue of self-confinement. We know, and Jessica, I'm not going to have you rehash what you already discussed in terms of the deleterious impacts on brain development, but I would like to just hear a little bit more about, and particularly from the youth, about their experience with cell confinement and how it really impacts them day to day. So I'm going to start with you, John. Did you want to share an experience where you had to spend some time in cell confinement and how that impacted you?
When I was a juvenile, it was a little different than the way it is now because they changed it. They have a new program for juveniles up there when they got solitary. It's not CTQ anymore. What's the name of the
Ramp.
It's ramp program. So when I was there, it was just like the 18 or older. So we would get a red jumpsuit, we'd be in our cells 23 hours a day. You come out 1 hour. On the weekend, they might give you 2 hours. You could talk to your family and you could take a shower. And that was about it. You get 23 hours in the cell. But then when you transition it down the hill, you get an hour only on weekdays. Monday through Friday, you come out for an hour. They lock you in the cage with the shower. You get an hour in the shower and that's it. You can't talk to your family. You don't come out on the weekends at all. And you're not allowed any books, any clothes, no hygiene. The food is not enough. I mean, sometimes it's old, sometimes it's not cooked, sometimes. I mean, so like it could, for the wrong person, it could really mess with their mental.
And Deshaun, did you want to share anything about any of your direct experience with cell confinement, with being in the box?
Yep.
Yeah, it's called something different, but it's still just the same thing as cell confinement. You come out for an hour a day while everybody else is coming out regularly. You could take a shower or you could call your family. And I don't know how you got to pick and choose from calling your family and taking a shower. It doesn't make sense to me.
So you either can take a shower or spend time talking to your family and that's it.
Yeah.
Now, and I saw a question like this in the chat. Would one of you be able to share how being in the box is different from your daily experience when you are in a partial or full lockdown, which has been up and down during COVID? So being in the box versus being on lockdown, which means being in your cell, but maybe not coming out.
It's the exact same thing, except when you're not in SAG, you have everything that you paid for. So you might have a TV, you might have your hot pot, your commissary, your clothes. But when you're in the box, it's the same thing. Like on the weekends, you don't come out at all. The only time your cell open is 4:30 through 6:30 in the morning when they drop off breakfast, 10:30 to 12 o'clock when they drop off lunch, and 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock when they drop off dinner, and that's it.
And it's only open for 5 seconds.
And sometimes when you're in SAG, they have traps in the door, so they don't even open your door. They just open the trap and put everything through the trap. You're not allowed to have pens, pencils, books.
You can't get your mail. You can't write no mail out.
No, they're not supposed to hold your mail. Not here.
Thank you for sharing that. It's hard to digest. You know, I did want to take an opportunity to pivot to Wynette and just hear from you directly about how some of the work that you did in New York around increasing out of cell time and just how that impacted the overall population and climate in the facility.
So sure, I think I do want to talk a little bit about what Deshaun, Joseph, and John were talking about as it relates to punitive segregation. In 2014, I was led the charge to end punitive segregation for 16 to 21-year-olds. So I led that reform for New York City. And just wanted to echo what Jessica mentioned earlier. It's really important to take into consideration brain development for our young people. Number one, the youth are our future, regardless of where they are at this moment. This is not where they will be in the end. And we have to make sure that we're providing opportunities for their brains to develop appropriately. We all know that science says that brain development for young males are in progress up until the age of 24. And so having punitive segregation or solitary confinement for young people at this age is detrimental to their growth and will impact their mental health. So one of the ways in which, when we ended punitive segregation for these young people, we had young people out of their cells, but we provided therapeutic responses. So a large part of this was really training the staff that were going to be working with young people to understand brain development, but also training them in a trauma really introducing an approach that will allow them to understand trauma and trauma responses. So one of the things we did was, for those young people that were engaging in challenging behaviors, we ensured that they had art therapy. We ensured that they had cognitive behavioral therapy. We ensured that there was engagement with program counselors. We actually created a new title to work in jail alongside officers with young people, so that there weren't only interactions with officers, there were interactions with program counselors all day long. And so program counselors would engage young people in discussions and conversations, and really focusing on the development of life skills and addressing the root causes of why some of the behavior challenges existed. So that's one thing I wanted to share. I also wanted to share that when we did this, we definitely saw a direct correlation with the increase in programs, had a direct correlation on the reduction of violent incidents in the facility. When kids were involved and engaged in productive and positive activities, it left less time for kids to be involved or for kids to be idle. And, one of the things that we really wanted to, really wanted to focus on was family engagement. And so when kids were in or having challenging days in which behavior was being exhibited, we involved their families. We called their mothers. We called the persons that they were closest to. We talked to them about how and what ways we could address some of the behavior that we were seeing. And we couldn't do it without family engagement. So family engagement is very important, and opportunities for young people to choose to be involved in positive activities. If you don't have any programming opportunities available, then what exactly is the alternative that you're providing young people? And so that is critical when you are really focusing on increasing out of cell time and decreasing the use of punitive segregation.
Thank you very much, Wynette, for that perspective. I want to pivot to the issue of mental health and access to mental health services. I also just want to clarify that since the Department of Justice report has been issued, It's our understanding that they've been engaged in negotiations with Department of Corrections, and that's ongoing. There hasn't been any sort of issued plan of action or anything to date. That is, our understanding is that's a work in progress between Justice and Department of Correction at this point in time. So just to clarify that. Moving to the issue of mental health. You know, I know that Sarah, this was obviously a big focus of the two reports that your office did. Would you mind just explaining for folks the mental health needs of the population there and just some of the challenges with the delivery system?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Marisa. It was so powerful to hear from these youth today. So I want to try to underscore some things, but be brief so we can continue to hear directly from kids. One of the things I'm so struck by with all the questions in the chat from participants is how opaque the system of youth incarceration really is. How few people are actually inside facilities, seeing what conditions are, how services are delivered. And the fact in some ways that there are so many questions about how kids are educated and treated is a concern about the transparency and accountability of such an important function of state government. And yes, one of the things that the Office of the Child Advocate has focused on extensively is what are we doing with our youth when they're there? What do we know about their needs? Well, what we know about their needs is that they're extremely extensive. You know, there's certain things in life that end up buying you a ticket into the deep end of our system. Extensive child welfare involvement for almost every single child that is in the system. We have found more than a third of the vast majority of children live in families that have had prior DCF involvement. More than a third have lived in families that have been involved with DCF more than 10 times for concerns of child abuse or neglect. Significant educational needs. Over 90% of minor youth at MYI were assessed at being about a 5th grade reading level, math level. Significant unmet mental health needs. The OCA has repeatedly found that in multiple reviews, that the majority of youth in the facility participated in 0 or 1 program during the duration of their confinement, a finding that we repeated in our most recent report. Our examination of records for kids who participated in no programming during their confinement revealed that most all of the youth carried historical or current diagnoses, including drug and alcohol dependency, grief, anxiety disorder, alcohol abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, and bipolar disorder. And again, referring back to the Department of Justice report from this past December, you know, their findings, and this relates back to some of the questions I see in the chat as to, you know, what has the response been to the reports? And I think it is fair to say that there are efforts being made at the DOC level to address the most acute things in the OCA reports and the things that the DOJ is finding. But I think when you consider the gravity, scope of the findings that the Department of Justice has made, these are not overnight fixes. Findings from the DOJ report about mental health, inadequate mental health assessments, failure to adequately identify and assess signs of trauma, failure to adequately assess and treat children with dual diagnoses of substance abuse and other psychiatric disorders, failure to adequately assess children placed in cell confinement status, failure to provide adequate mental health care treatment, reduction of mental health scores and services when children refuse treatment offered, and a failure to provide group therapy services that are appropriate for children. And I quote, "We found no therapy groups that are specifically designed for younger population, nor any groups whose membership is limited to children. And all available groups are short-term, which is not suitable for children. For example, the trauma group runs for about 8 weeks, though children need a much longer period of time to benefit." So, you know, these are the most recent findings from the federal government, and those conditions violate youth constitutional rights. It will take time and significant transformation to change the conditions that these youth are describing and that the federal government found. Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks, Sarah. I did want to take the opportunity to hear directly from the youth about their experiencing their experiences accessing mental health and mental health services. I'm gonna start with Joseph. I'm gonna start with you and just ask you a little bit about your experiencing trying to access mental health at the facility.
So a lot of us have mental health problems, medical problems. Mental health is our go-to to talk about how and what's going on. So legally, we have the option to go to mental health or medical when needed, but during school and sometimes in the unit is rejected. Most of the time.
So if you're having a need to reach out to mental health and it happens to be during school or an off-hour time on the unit, you can't reach mental health?
Most of the time is rejected.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And John, can you share a little bit about your experience with accessing mental health and something about how the system works there and how you make a request?
The way they got it set up, it's like, if you not cool with a certain CO that you have working your unit, then he won't call down the mental health. And it also depends on what mental health worker you have. Cause sometimes they'll take you if they feel like you need to be spoken to, and you say that you need mental health services, they'll call down for you, and then maybe she'll be able to take you in the next 30 minutes so you can talk to her and get whatever's on your mind out. Feel me? You can be having a mental breakdown. But most COs just tell you write a request form, and they got up to 14 business days to get back to you. By that 14 business days, whatever you was thinking about, whatever had you tripping that day, you would be going crazy in the cell. You'd be losing it. Some people try to commit suicide. Some people have seizures in the cell. Some people just don't feel right. Feel me? And write a request. That's what they tell you. Write a request. And if they don't get back to you within those 3 weeks, write another one.
Wow. That's got to be frustrating, beyond frustrating. I mean, so tell me, it's my understanding that they do have on certain units, that they do have professionals that do tours. Can you talk about that? Or what, can one of you talk about the tours?
All right, so depending on which mental health worker you have, they do tours. And usually it's on second shift around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock after dinner. If your mental health worker is only a first shift worker, then you can't ask your mental health worker if she could take you because she doesn't do tour at that time. And then you can't go see another mental health worker unless your mental health worker won't be coming in. And then they might take you, but you're not on the caseload, so they don't have to take you. And then it also depends on what mental health worker that you have, on how frequent she'll talk to you, how comfortable you are with her, when she can call you down. Some people go once a week, some people go twice a month, some people go once a month. Some people, they just call them down randomly. And it's not always a structured battle with your mental health disabilities. And then
Thank you for sharing that. I know there were some questions in the chat just about how frequent you receive services, and I know that there's a system where the mental health rating scores from 1 to 5, with a mental health 1 really having no mental health needs and a mental health 5 having the most severe mental health needs. I think that, you know, the typical access to mental health for somebody that's in the middle, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is the chance to see your clinician during normal business hours once every 2 weeks. Is that right?
that's what it's supposed to be.
You're muted.
You're muted, Marisa.
Thank you. I think that just provides some perspective on the ability to access mental health. I would like to get some input from Wynette, and just from the facility perspective about some ways that, in particular, the teaming approach that you used at your former facility, and how that was effective.
Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. But I did want to share, that's why it's very important to have both uniform and non-uniform person on every housing area so that you have consistent contact with someone outside of just an officer. So all of the program counselors that worked on the units either had experience working with youth, or most of them at DOC had MSW, so they were social workers, had a social work background. But it's very important to make sure that youth have access to several people along with an officer, because there might be needs for security and kids might need to talk to an officer about some other things, but it's very important to have a program counselor, mental health clinician, chaplain, just numerous people touring those areas and being in those housing areas during a 7-hour shift to ensure that kids have access to people that they can talk to beyond the officer who is in the housing area. One other thing that we saw that worked really, really well is, well, there are two things. One is training. All officers assigned to young people had to be trained in adolescent brain development and de-escalation skills, safe crisis management, as well as courses such as youth developmental techniques to address challenging behavior, but also mental health training and understanding what that looks like in real life. So sometimes if as an officer without this training, you are thinking that somebody is being defiant without understanding the brain development and understanding that the frontal lobe really controls a lot of behavior that people might see as defiance, you will react in a way that's not appropriate. So really helping people understand what type of behaviors young people present and what type of behaviors young people present when they're traumatized or have mental health issues. In addition to that, another thing that we thought worked really, really well was having a multidisciplinary approach to supporting young people. So what we called it was a multidisciplinary support team. And and I would say it would be someone from the programming division, a program counselor, mental health clinician, the chaplain, the officer, the child, the mom, the social work, the legal aid, attorney. If they couldn't come, sometimes they sent the legal aid social work. But we would have these big meetings about how could we support the young person in question? How can we tailor a plan to address some of the challenging behaviors that we see, or some of the behaviors that we see when we know young people are not flourishing or not doing well? It is a very difficult environment for young people who are in a jail, and it's also a difficult environment for the people who work there. So it's very important that we have a good understanding of mental health, and it's very important to pull in all of the disciplines who might touch the life of a young person who needs that support. So everyone, including mom, including grandma, whomever has the best relationship, we would talk to the child and find out who that person is, include them in this multidisciplinary team discussion to figure out how can we provide a circle of support around this young person.
Thank you, Wynette, for sharing those practices and that experience. I know there's been a lot of discussion or questions around education and access to education. That was a big component of the Department of Justice report, and I do want to be able to take some time to to spend time on that. Sarah, would you mind really briefly just kind of highlighting for folks the shortcomings that DOJ found in regards to education, in particular special education?
Sure. Can you hear me? Am I muted? Sorry, I was just pulling up the report to make sure I'm quoting it accurately. Yes, so the department, it was one of the Department of Justice key findings related to the inadequacy of special education services for children. And I'll just outline some of their findings. They said MYI does not provide children with disabilities a free, appropriate public education consistent with federal law. They spent extensive time discussing how the facility routinely reduces special education services upon children's entry into the facility. They talked about the staffing and how regular education teachers are expected to implement special education services and modifications without appropriate support and staffing. They talked about the dramatic difference in hours, educational hours between a child's IEP that they come in with versus what they get at MYI. That MYI routinely fails to implement modifications and accommodations required by IEPs. They routinely fail to provide what are called related services required by IEPs, which can include speech and language support, counseling services, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy. The DOJ found that MYI fails to provide adequate behavioral supports for children with disabilities. And lastly, that MYI fails to provide adequate transition planning and services for children with disabilities, despite the requirements in federal law. One thing I think it's important for folks to know is that it is ultimately the obligation of the State Department of Education to ensure that school districts, including USD1, which operates within the Department of Correction, are following federal special education law. So that is a joint obligation between the DOC and the State Department of Education. So part of what the Office of the Child Advocate is and will continue to be doing is meeting with state officials at the Department of Education to talk about additional monitoring and enforcement that is necessary to ensure that educational programming improves. Thanks, Marisa.
Thank you, Sarah, for highlighting those key points. I want to focus on two things, and I want to hear from the youth. Two things for me that really, hit home were that are so crucial for these young people and their future success are their access to transitional planning and programming and alternatives to traditional education, so vocational programming, and also the ability to access behavioral interventions and supports in school and remain in school. So one of the key findings was that the facility has a tendency to utilize custodial staff to get involved in school situations and remove kids from school. And I wanted to hear from the youth on this in particular. I'm going to start with Deshaun. You shared with me this idea of a signal 11 that happens in school. What's a signal 11?
A signal 11 is like when you're acting out in class, like a teacher, she pressed the buttons, the COs come, you can get sent to SAG or CTQ or ramp for it. You get a ticket for it. It could mess up a whole bunch of stuff that you got going, like parole, time served, anything. And it could be as simple as you talking back to a teacher or you and a classmate arguing. It's like you get sent to SAG for no reason, basically, just for something where they could have just talked to you one-on-one and asked you what the problem was. And now they're giving disciplinary actions for something that you didn't even do anything. You're talking, not listening.
So when, in a typical school environment, in those kinds of scenarios, you should be given the opportunity to be redirected, to be given a break, to access a social worker, like Joseph talked about, to access a mental health worker. What is actually happening is that you're receiving some sort of custodial discipline, which may result in you having other privileges taken away or even going to the box.
Yes.
What we talk about?
I thought she was talking.
Hold on one second.
Oh.
I'm gonna have Joseph talk right now, Marisa.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
All right, teachers call signal 11s if you're talking to others, or if you raise your voice out of frustration, or even something simple like getting up to sharpen your pencil. And signal 11s is when you go to the box. And most of the time, teachers just use that just if they're having a bad day or something, just to, I don't know any other way to put it, but
So what would be more helpful here?
what would be more helpful is if they would just pull us aside and talk to us first before they just automatically just send us to the box for no reason. Is, to me, it seems dumb.
Well, and also, right, the opportunity to access mental health, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I know someone, they asked to go to mental health, and they said that you got to go to the social worker in school, but you don't want to talk to the social worker, you want to talk to your mental health worker, and now it's a whole problem because now you're arguing with the teacher. Now you get a signal 11 because you just asked to talk to a mental health worker.
Hold on one
So,
second.
something that happened to me is I asked for a mental health worker and the teacher declined it from me. And the teacher told me that I have to talk to the principal. And then when I asked her to call the principal, she never called the principal. So like, I really don't understand the process that they have going on in the school system, but it's,
Frustrating.
yeah, it's frustrating.
I got a situation, so. This is John speaking. And one time, I was in school and it seemed like my teacher was having a bad day, because usually she was a pretty good teacher. We never had no problems before, I mean. And I guess today she had a bad day. Me and her get into a little argument, feel me? So I told her to call, I have a special ed teacher. I told her to call my special ed teacher. I like to go with my special ed teacher, feel me, for this period, and I do my work in her class. And she didn't want to call. I got frustrated and I clenched my fist, and she called a signal 11. I went to the box for 3 days, and they took away my transitional supervision. I had a ticket. I had to wait 4 months for my ticket to clear, and all of that could have been avoided if she would have called my special ed teacher or my counselor or my mental health worker, feel me, and got me out of the environment before anything could have escalated.
I have to thank you all for sharing these experiences. It's really, it's difficult to hear, but it's important to hear, and it's very enlightening. I also want to talk about the access to, in particular, vocational programming and what's also called transitional programming. John, you are 18, and have you had any opportunities to participate in vocational programming there?
No.
Okay. And Joseph, what about yourself? Have you had the opportunity to participate? You are 19. Have you had the opportunity to participate in any vocational program?
No, I've wrote requests and talked to people that directs the vocational services, and I've been declined.
Now, do the two of you have suggestions or wishes about access to vocational programming that you'd like to share with everyone?
We're not able to sign up for voc classes because we have to acquire either our GED or our high school diploma before you can enroll in voc classes. But we should have access to be able to invoke classes before you even do that. Because some people need voc credits, but you can't get a voc credit without going to a voc class. So they'll take that voc credit and they'll put you in a different class. Like they'll give you an extra math class and say that's your voc credit, but it's not. And we only have graphic arts, culinary, and and automotive and barbering. But what about HVAC, plumbing, genetic engineering? I mean, stuff like that. We don't get none of that. And then this is stuff that you can use when you go home. But in here, it's like, you got to do what they want, how they want it, or you're not going to get anything at all.
Thank you for sharing that. And I see some really good comments in the chat just about the importance of transitional planning and how it's so crucial to success and ending recidivism. So really important discussion here. I know, Deshaun, you also had some comments and thoughts about how school there is different than in the quote unquote real world. Did you want to share any of your thoughts?
Yeah, like being a juvenile, you can't access vocationaries at all. You can't do anything until you graduate. I could earn credits on one-on-one stuff, but it's not the same work that I'm doing in the world. I don't do algebra. I don't do geometry. I don't do physical science. It's simple. It's like we're doing elementary and middle school work and earning high school credits for it. So none of it is helping me for going back to the world. Like, say if I was to go back to the world right now, I would be lost and I would start failing classes all over again just because in here they're not teaching me the right material.
So you're getting some credits and you're achieving some success that way, but you feel like when it comes time to reintegrate, you're going to be really at a loss.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. I see that we're getting close to the end of the webinar here, so I want to be able to get to talk about a couple more key things and see if if we can't answer all questions today, we will figure out a way to get back to you and answer some of your questions. So definitely put information in the chat. I did, while the Department of Justice report focused on the specifics of minors under 18-year-olds, I do want to highlight the ongoing issues and challenges for the 18 to 21-year-olds that are there. And one day they're 17 and the next day they're 18, right? And they haven't changed as an individual, and all of the developmental and brain science that we know around their, where they are developmentally is still relevant. I didn't know, Sarah, if you wanted to say a couple of words just about the 18 to 21-year-old population that's there.
Yeah, thanks, Marisa. And I want to be conscious of time. So I'm hoping we'll have a couple minutes to talk about solutions to just what these young men are talking about. But as I think you heard from John and Joseph and Deshaun, as kids turn 18, things change. Right. And the majority of youth at MYI are 18 to 21. And I think most of what the boys are describing is significantly acute for older youth. So the level of confinement, the access to mental health care, the findings that OCA has made in our most recent report published last November found that most of these issues are even more acute for the 18 to 21-year-olds who have the same significant and developing needs, and that the youth 15 to 17 have. So an enormous amount of work to do there to ensure that the young people receive adequate education. We have found hundreds of incidents of it's called restrictive housing, which is the segregation that one of the young men here described for the 18 plus, the 23 hours a day of confinement while on RHU. So I think those are issues that really need very, very urgent attention. So thanks for raising that, Marisa.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I want to be able to turn to where do we go from here, right? And so I do want to take the opportunity to try to hear from all of our panelists about kind of reimagining the system. So right now we have these young people who are in the adult court and who are experiencing confinement in the Department of Corrections. And we've learned kind of the shortcomings of what is going on there from the Department of Justice recent report. And I'd like to kind of talk about where we should go from here. So Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to kick us off on what you think we should be doing instead, or how you would like to reimagine the system.
Yeah, thank you. And before I do that, I don't know, Deshaun and Joseph and John, if you can see the comments, but if you can't, you're getting a lot of comments from people saying that we hear you and we're listening to you and we're going to fight for something different. And we're very grateful for your willingness to show the courage to join this call and share your experiences. So I wasn't sure how you're sitting on one screen, but I wanted to make sure that you had that feedback. And that relates to my first point. I think there were some, I want to talk very quickly about what we can do individually and then also what we can do system-wide. And there were some questions about what individual advocates could do. And I think number one is we have to hear what young people are saying in our facilities. And so for those who represent young people, even if you're not representing them on issues related to their conditions, ask them what their day-to-day experience is, ask them if they've spent time in their cell on their own, in the box. You can use different terminology, ask them what's happening with their school, and then that information, bring it to court, even if that court is not the court that can address it. Any moment that we have to raise what's happening to our young people, I think we have to take advantage of that. For the facility itself, I mean, across the country, courts are saying solitary confinement is unconstitutional for young people. We're not measuring it in days or weeks. It really is minutes, minutes in a cell until you can cool down and come back out. And I think the young people said, just talk to us. So that's a pretty straightforward answer for how a facility can rethink, and it's supported by all the research that de-escalation and the changed approach is really about listening to young people and finding solutions. And then really a couple of quick thoughts on the policy front about things that can change. First, echoing Sarah's call for transparency and oversight. Youth really don't belong in adult systems. So anything we can do to move young people out of adult systems, that's going to help us avoid a whole set of problems that we just heard about. And even more than that, a lot of across the country, we're seeing a lot of places turn away from institutional placement for young people and to community-based solutions that are evidence-based. So really reinvesting and reimagining a system that identifies problems and supports young people. We can stop this pipeline on the front end. We talked a little bit earlier about the disparities. That would also address our disparities problem. So that was a lot, but I'm always on hand to be able to share and brainstorm and learn from other folks who are working on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Sarah, did you want to share real brief so we can leave time for our youth?
Sure. Yeah, really quickly. Thanks, Marisa. I think, we've heard a lot here today. I love the suggestion in the chat. So more for a part two that is really focused on youth recommendations for reform. So I'm definitely here for that. I think that's a great idea. And I think, transformation requires transformation. So the Office of the Child Advocate has put out a couple of reports since our requirement for reporting started in 2016. So that was 5 years ago. The DOJ has now had a report. And transformation has been recommended by the Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Council, which includes the removal of minor youth from the adult prison system, which is the direction federal law is moving in. It's the direction a lot of other states are moving in. And I would add, so I think that process of planning is underway in Connecticut, but I have to underscore that what we're talking about is not just who runs the building that kids go in. Too often in Connecticut, we're focused on, what is the building that is going to house young people? And I understand the logistics of that, but we need to move from where we put kids to what is the work and support that children and young and emerging adults need. And then what is the infrastructure we need to support that work, from staffing to community connections to educational supports, life skills, developmental supports, et cetera. And that's really the transformation that we need. The building comes after that, or the buildings. So that's the work that I'm here for. And I appreciate the opportunity today, Marisa. So I'd like to hear where our young people, what they think we should be doing next.
I do want to give Wynette a quick chance to, thank you for that, Sarah. I want to give Wynette a quick chance to weigh in, and we can end on with our youth.
Sure.
Wynette,
Yeah, I just want to make it really quick. One, there will be no meaningful reform without the voices of youth. So Deshaun, Joseph, and John, thank you for your courage and your voice. It was really important today. The second thing I wanted to just ensure that I repeat is that reentry planning is necessary. Kids need to know that this is not their final destination. So we need to make sure that reentry planning begins at admission. That's one. And then two, there needs to be deliberate and intentional collaboration between between Department of Correction and the Department of Education, so that they can create meaningful pathways that speak to one another, so that when kids start work like culinary arts or plumbing or carpentry or automotive, they get to finish it in the community. Because it's no point in starting it and then they cannot finish it and don't have the certification so that they can use it to create alternative lifestyles. So we need to make sure that the tools that they're learning and getting tools while incarcerated, and then have the opportunity to continue to hone those skills and gain the tools so that they can be successful when they re-enter society.
thank you, Wynette. I know there's an amazing program, the reentry program that you helped put in place at Rikers, and I think that's something that we can definitely take a look at. I'm going to pivot to the youth now, and I saw a comment in the chat from Daryl McGraw about the importance of youth with lived experience, youth being able to access people with lived experience, and I believe that's actually one of our young people's recommendations. So I'm going to pivot. Joseph, would you mind sharing with us one of the things that you think is really important for to make a change?
Yeah, so I've seen people come in. I even seen people come in, and mainly I think we should have help getting jobs and housing. So when we leave, we could be on the right path once we are released from incarceration. And while we're here, I think we should have people who are older come in and speak to us and tell us about their experiences, so we can just learn from other people's mistakes and really think about how we want to live our life. Like how we want to continue living our life and not come back to jail. You know what I mean? Well, that's what I got right now.
Thank you, Joseph. Daryl McGraw out in the audience says he's right there with you. He's there to help. And so, yes, we definitely want more credible messengers and folks that can link with youth on the inside and bring them to the outside. Deshaun, did you want to, or John, did you want to share with us what you would like to see change?
Yeah, like he said, I think we should have a support system. You can't put somebody in here, hold them down a year, 2 years, 5 years, 6 years, then send them home with nothing. And now he's gonna go back to his old habits because that's what he's used to. If he's been in here 5 years, he barely had contact with his family. He don't have no outside support system. Nobody wants to hire him because he's been incarcerated. He probably never had a job before. He doesn't have a resume. Nobody could vouch for him. Now he's now he's having troubles and he's gonna go back into his old illegal ways because it's the easiest ways. It's all he knows, feel me? And they expect, and then when he come back, they look at him like he's the crazy one, like if he went home and did something wrong, but all he did was what he knows is right in his mind. And then they be like he's just another lost cause, feel me? Maybe he just doesn't want to do what he needs to do, but it's not always like that. Sometimes it's what he has to do. Some people like he can't have a job in his city because it's not safe for him. But he doesn't have financials to get to a different city to get back and forth from work because he doesn't have transportation. Or maybe nobody wants to give him a chance because of what he's been convicted for before that, feel me, prior. So it's like, it's something that always follows you, feel me? And it's not always right. And then they make it seem like you the one that's still doing wrong when you trying to do right and everybody else is doing you wrong.
Thank you, John. Deshaun, what about you? Did you have some final words for us on how you like to see things change?
Yeah, the system should look at every kid in their individual situation and provide them opportunities and pathways based on that. And not just try to put us in a box that is for adults only based on our age. And they want us to go home and be outstanding citizens, but they don't give us opportunities in here or the material for us to go home and do stuff like that. Like, you can't get certain jobs because you don't know what you're doing. Like, some people don't know how to count, add money. So how are you gonna go to Macy's and be a cashier and stuff like that?
Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also want to say, like,
Like you were saying, like, you can't work in your city all the time because it's gonna pull you back into certain situations that got you in here. Like, people you might be for, even if you go home and you trying to keep your head out the mix, you always get pulled into bullshit. And my fault. But it's stuff that happens. Like, feel me?
yeah.
I have to thank you all for being so courageous and sharing your input and insight and direct experience with us. I know it hasn't been easy. I know you went out on a limb. There's been some general concern. Folks are worried about you, that you're speaking out, but everybody needs to know that the Office of the Child Advocate is there with you, that our office is there with you, and that, there should be no concern about you taking any sort of retaliation for speaking the truth. Okay, and we're all working together with you. I think this has been an extremely productive and thoughtful discussion. I know there was a general question that we wanted to get to, and we're over time now, so I'm going to wrap. But around whether or not these youth felt that the adult system was appropriate for them or serving them well, I'm not going to answer for them, but I think we've established through a lot of the input here that the way it's currently working is not working. I think this discussion's been extremely productive and thoughtful as Connecticut considers the general state of juvenile justice today and the trying to figure out how to reduce recidivism. I think that all of the recommendations that we've heard from the discussion today should be taken to heart. And we look forward to the opportunity to work with all of you out there in doing that. I do want to thank each of our participants today for coming, for sharing their expertise and their input. I especially, again, want to thank each of you, Deshaun, John, Joseph, for coming, being courageous, giving us your input and your insight. And again, thank you to the Department of Correction for making that possible. We will be following up and sending all registered participants materials, and we will do our best to also address any questions that were in the chat that we didn't get to today. and look forward to working with you on ways to move this agenda forward.
Marisa, can we end with one last thing?
Yes,
I know you're
please.
over. Real quick.
Yeah, this is John. I understand that the state feel like everybody should be provided the same thing to make everybody equal, but some people need more to be equal with others, because some people aren't at the same level as other people. I seen a picture, and there was a grown man and he could see over the fence, but the little boy couldn't. So they gave the little boy 2 boxes just so he could be equal with the grown man. So equality isn't always equal the way they say it is. Just because you give everybody the same thing don't mean they all get the same result or the same outcome as everybody else. Yeah, that's it though.
Thank you for that reminder, John. And thank you, everybody, for participating today. And thank you to the Office of the Public Defender for giving us the opportunity to put this on.
Marisa, can you tell folks where this is going to be?
In terms of, yes, we will, there will be a recording on our website, and we will send you a link to that recording so it can be accessed after the fact.
And was it on CTN as well?
CTN was not able to broadcast live, but they will also have it available on their website. Yes.
Great. We'll circulate it on our network too once it's recorded. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.